Good evening. Thank you for coming to this program on how will Seattle grow. I'm really excited that we are going to hear three very interesting speakers and learn a lot about Seattle's comprehensive plan. The Neighborhoods Committee and the Environment Committee at Horizon House are co-sponsoring this meeting tonight. I'm Laura Weiss, and I'm a member of the Neighborhoods Committee. I just wanted to say a couple words of background, at least as I understand what the comprehensive plan is about. You're going to hear from Michael, who will give you a much more thorough explanation. But when I was thinking about it, I remembered back in the early 1990s when the Growth Management Act was passed in Washington State. How many of you were around here in the early 90s? Yeah, okay. And remember, the concern was, we called it urban sprawl, that the rural areas were going to be overrun and that they should be preserved for agriculture and open space. So the comprehensive plan really is one of the important laws that implements that. And each city and each county in Washington State has to come up with a plan every 10 years that shows how it will accommodate growth of population over the following 20 years. So the Seattle estimated population is just under 750,000 now, and there are projections that it could be nearly 1 million by 2050. That's a lot of growth. So where does it go, and how do we deal with the environment as part of that growth? So really important questions. And I'm really happy to let me introduce our first speaker, who's going to give us an overview of the plan. And this is Michael Hubner. He's with the city's Department of Planning and Community Development. In fact, he is their long-range planning manager and the project lead for the One Seattle Plan Comprehensive Plan update. He brings 25 years of experience in regional and city planning in the Puget Sound area. He lives in Seattle, enjoys exploring the city and its natural surroundings by foot and by bicycle. Michael, welcome to you.
There we go. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your interest in the future of the city and the city's comprehensive plan. It is not an easy topic to get people to come out and listen to, even though we think this is extremely important for the future of everybody that lives in the city now and really for the region. So we're calling this update of the city's comprehensive plan the One Seattle Plan. And it is something we do once a decade, and we are in the middle of a period where we are going out into the community and talking about a draft plan. We're not done with the plan. What we're talking about tonight is a draft, and we want to hear from the public about what you all think. So I hope that some of you will be inspired to think about what you heard tonight and provide some comment to the city that can help shape what is eventually in the final plan. As was noted, this is a plan for the next 20 years in the city, and we are expecting to grow by quite a lot. We have been growing over the past decade extremely fast, especially looking over the last 100 years or so. It's one of the strongest periods of growth that the city has seen in its history. We're required to do this by the Growth Management Act. It's not just about growth and development. The comprehensive plan informs and shapes a lot of what the city does across many departments: transportation, housing, capital facilities like wastewater and sewers and many other things that we do. So the comprehensive plan is really comprehensive. And it replaces our current plan. Here you see the cover of our current plan, Seattle 2035. We're now planning to the year 2044, but we're calling the plans the One Seattle Plan. We are still concerned about challenges that the region faces, like sprawl. That's still a really important issue for the region, for the city. But we have among the new challenges that we have as we go over time, there are new challenges the city faces, and every time we update the comprehensive plan, new issues rise to the top. One of those is housing. I know tonight we're going to be focusing on housing. I'm also going to talk about some of the other important issues that are addressed in the plan, but we know that we have a number of challenges in people being able to find the housing that they need, that's the right type of housing, that's affordable to the incomes that they are able to earn. That is not, we are very aware that there are residents of Seattle who are being forced out because the rent is too high, or their neighborhoods are changing and development is causing people to leave. And entire communities are really threatened by some of the growth. So displacement is another issue which is important to us that we can address by planning for housing. And we have set some goals for this update, which you're going to hear about. I'll talk about how we're going to do these, but the goals include increasing the supply of housing and the diversity of types of housing, because right now we're not getting a lot of diversity. We're getting a lot of very small apartments and larger, very expensive homes. And we want to create the conditions for new types of housing that meet people's needs and are more affordable, reducing market pressure, expanding opportunities in all neighborhoods, and also looking at how housing can help to shape communities, neighborhoods, to be more complete, inclusive, more walkable. I'll be talking about that as well. And finally, for lower income households in the city, for communities of color who haven't had the opportunities to build wealth through home ownership, to provide new opportunities for people to enter the ownership market. So those are our goals, and I'm going to talk about how we're doing that with this plan. This is just a quick timeline of this work. Importantly, the plan is draft. We're not going to be done with this work until the end of this year, 2024. So we're not done yet, and we're looking to hear from the public about what everybody in the city thinks about our proposal. There are three documents out there. There's the draft plan itself, which is about a 200-page document. There's a lot there. I do want to highlight for you all, and I will leave copies. We don't expect everybody to read 200 pages, but we do have a very brief folio that describes the plan, has some nice illustrations of what I'll be talking about tonight. I'm going to leave these behind, something that you can have with you and to think about what you heard. And we have a website with shorter documents you can read about the plan. There's also one among those shorter documents is a description of what we are doing to change the rules in neighborhoods which historically have been single-family neighborhoods, so mostly detached homes. I'll be talking about that briefly tonight. We have a new state law that requires all large cities in the state to adopt new zoning rules that provide more housing choice in those neighborhoods. We have a document that describes that. And finally, we have a draft environmental impact statement. This is a requirement of state law. It's a very long and technical document. It does have shorter summary versions of it. We're also collecting comments on that document. And what it does is set out a range of options that the city has considered for how we would grow into the future and what those impacts of those choices would be. I'm going to get right into it here. I'm not going to talk about many parts of the plan, but I do want to very briefly just highlight for you that there are 13 different chapters of the plan, and you see that on the right-hand side of the slide that deal with a range of topics, not only growth, but transportation, utilities, economic development. We have a new climate and environment element because of the climate crisis and planning around the impacts from climate change. And you see here on this slide, just at a high level, these are the 4 themes that we are elevating in this plan that are most important. Housing and affordability, we're going to focus on that tonight. Equity and opportunity, happy to field questions and talk about that piece. That's really throughout the plan. Community and neighborhoods, I will want to touch on how housing development can help shape our neighborhoods. And then climate and sustainability. Those are the 4 big new things in this plan. But I want to talk mostly about what we're doing around growth and how we grow, and especially how we grow and provide new and more housing. So this plan is different than in the past, where I don't know who is familiar with the urban village strategy, which was a strategy that was adopted in the early 1990s, shaped planning in the city since over the several decades since that time. We're not throwing out the urban village strategy, but we are taking an approach that looks at the whole city, not just selected places that are centers or villages, and I'll show you a map of where those are, but really look at every neighborhood in the city, and that every place has a role to grow and add the housing that we need and address our housing crisis. Those areas are, and you see there's categories here. These are, we call them place types. We have regional centers. We're in a regional center right now. This is the greater downtown area has 4 regional centers. These are our densest neighborhoods. There's a lot of jobs. There's a lot of housing and a lot of high-rise development. A lot of apartments in terms of dwelling types. We have urban centers. We called those urban villages in the past. Many of them are the same. I'll show you a map as well. Those are places like Roosevelt or West Seattle Junction or down through the Rainier Valley around our light rail stations. Again, a lot of apartments, sort of 5 to 7 story apartments, also some jobs and services. We have a new place type called neighborhood center. They're like our regional centers and our urban centers. They're places of more concentrated housing, more options for apartments, and a mix of uses and things that people can get to every day. Supermarkets, post offices, healthcare, but much smaller and scattered throughout the city. And I'll show you what that looks like. That's a new idea in this plan. The other big new idea is what we're calling urban neighborhoods. Mostly, those are the neighborhoods that have had single-family zoning in the past, and now we'll have new rules that allow a wider range of housing types. It'll look different from the street. It'll provide different options for people of different households of different sizes and that are more affordable. And then we have our industrial areas. We're not changing anything about our industrial areas in this comprehensive plan update. That's something the city did a couple of years ago. And so thankfully, we've got enough to deal with here, so I didn't want to get into the industrial policy issues, but we are really focusing on housing. Here's a map of this new growth strategy. Do not worry. There's a lot going on in this map. I'm going to break it down for you and talk about each part individually. But you can see here, every neighborhood, every area of the city has a place type where we're planning for new housing. All the areas in blue especially are more concentrated areas of housing. I'm going to talk about the regional centers just very briefly because we're not changing very much here. You can see the greater downtown area. If you may follow my cursor here a little bit. University District, Northgate. We are reclassifying Ballard as a regional center. That's more a change in the name for Ballard, and we're not changing what Ballard looks like or the zoning in Ballard, but just Ballard has grown. It's going to have light rail. It meets our criteria to be a regional center, and it will help us capture some funds to build out our transportation system in Ballard. Urban centers, we called these urban villages in the past. We're growing up as a city, and we thought some new naming here to really have centers of different sizes. So we're calling them urban centers. You can see them here across the city. The 2 big changes here are a new urban center at the northeast 130th light rail station. That's way up here at the north end of Seattle, just south of the Jackson Park golf course. That's a proposed new urban center. And then several of our urban centers are proposed to be expanded. Phoenix Greenwood, Upper Queen Anne, West Seattle Junction, Admiral, Morgan Junction, and Othello at Graham Street. So those are areas where we will do work with those local communities to look at zoning changes that will allow for a more diverse array of housing in more areas out from their current boundaries. So if any of you have lived in those neighborhoods, you'll know the kind of conversations we're going to have with folks about that. And then the neighborhood centers. Here, there are 24 of them. You can see there the blue dots here. They also have a little fuzzy boundaries on them. We're going to work with those communities to change the zoning, to define the boundaries of these places. They are much smaller than the urban centers or the regional centers, but we think they're going to play an important role in the neighborhoods. I have a couple of pictures that illustrates this. This is a new idea. I wanted to illustrate this by zooming in a little bit. Here's one of the proposed locations in Maple Leaf. This is what Maple Leaf looks like now. And you can see that this is an example of a neighborhood that has a lot going for it in terms of amenities and services, transit, parks and open space, schools, shops and services. It's largely surrounded by single-family homes. What we envision here is providing more opportunities by changing the zoning around a central place like Maple Leaf, but there are 23 other ones, not just here, that would look roughly like what you see in this picture. Right around the core, maybe 5 or 6 story apartment buildings. As you go out into maybe lower scale, 3 or 4 story apartments and townhomes to provide more housing choices within a short walk of all of that good stuff that is in a place like Maple Leaf. And finally, the urban neighborhoods. This is the rest of the city. It's a large area. There are 2 types of change that we would be making in urban neighborhoods. One is where in that cream color that you see on the map, that would be where new zoning to allow what we call middle housing. There is a new state law that requires that the city zone for middle housing. That is duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, so like building with 4 units attached. Courtyard apartments, which are small apartments, sort of all with entries on the ground around an open space. Cottage housing, which would be very small separate units, and sixplexes, along with townhomes. We're getting a lot of townhomes in the city. We'd also allow those. So it's a lot of different housing choices that could be built in the cream area. And along the orange lines are our frequent transit routes. A lot of those areas are already zoned for apartments, but there are some places where right against the transit, we're still only allowing single-family dwellings. We would be looking to fill in those gaps and allow apartment zoning along nearly all of those transit routes that you see in the city. Again, this is work we'll do with local neighborhood residents as we go forward. Here are just some pictures of what middle housing looks like. Generally, we would be allowing 4 units on a typical Seattle lot, which is about 5,000 square feet. Near a transit stop, it could go up to 6 units on a lot. We think we'll mostly get the 4. In some places, perhaps just 3. Here are some pictures of some drawings of what that housing might look like. Some of them are attached. Some of them are standalone cottage-like structures. Some of them look like a small apartment building, like the sixplex you see on the lower right. Some of them have alleys, and you can access them from the back. Some of them don't have alleys, reflecting our variety of situations in our neighborhoods. We would have incentives for affordable units. The market is not going to produce homes that are affordable to all households by a long shot. And we do have 2 types of incentives that we're proposing that to allow developers to build slightly or even more larger buildings for more affordable units. Think of people who are working a single parent household, or someone on one earning maybe half of the average income, maybe a little bit more, and hopefully some ownership units, some affordable home ownership opportunities with these incentives. And lastly, in the neighborhood residential, this is not a housing concept. This is not a housing concept, but we are looking at this idea, and we've heard a lot of enthusiasm from the public about corner stores. In the past, a long time ago, this used to be allowed in more neighborhoods is small shops that met local needs. And actually, if you walk through Seattle neighborhoods, you see a lot of older buildings on corners that used to be stores and maybe are now homes. We are proposing to allow that in more of the city now, really throughout most of our neighborhood residential areas. And it'll be interesting to see what gets built with that new provision in place. People are really interested in this, although we are also very careful about designing the zoning so that it fits in well with areas which are now mostly homes. I'm going to skip over the displacement for a moment. I just want to close with, I want to give some time to the other speakers, what we're doing to reach out to the public. We're not done. This is a draft plan, and it's the first of 2 phases where we're going out and talking to the community this year. This spring, we're talking about the plan, and next fall, we're going to go out and talk about the zoning. So a more detailed proposal going out into neighborhoods. But right now, we're talking about the plan, and we're doing things like open houses. We're going out to meetings like this, where folks have requested briefings on the plan, and we share some of our ideas. We have information on the web. We are accepting comment in writing. So you feel free to ask me questions or make comments tonight, but we really do need to hear from people in writing, either as an email, or you can go to a special website where we have, which makes it very easy to provide comment right on the document if you want to do it that way. You could send us a letter, whatever. As long as it's in writing, it's easy for us to take in and document. And then we have some special meetings for our draft environmental impact statement. That's a very formalized process to get those comments. And here's our open house schedule, just so you see we're going out into we're using our council districts as a basis to think about, make sure having at least one open house in each of our council districts. And we're about midway through the open house schedule. And finally, here's our website for providing comment, learning more about the plan. I look forward to having a conversation after the other speakers have a chance to speak. And our comment period closes on May 6th. Great.
Thank you, Michael. Our next 2 speakers, Calvin Jones and Scott Berkley, are going to provide a response to Michael's presentation and say that the city's plan doesn't go far enough to provide adequate housing and protect the environment. They're with a coalition of groups called the Complete Communities Coalition, and they belong to an organization called Tech for Housing. Can you hold on? I've got to introduce you briefly. Could have done that at the beginning, maybe, but anyhow. By the way, we are going to have a Q&A after Scott and Calvin speak, so get your questions ready. Scott Berkley is a software engineer at Sound Transit after having worked at Meta and a variety of tech startups. He was born and raised in Renton, Washington, and moved back to Seattle after spending time in LA and New York City. He has been a member of Tech for Housing for 3 years and enjoys volunteering to make Seattle a more livable, affordable, and inclusive city. Calvin Jones, that was Scott, this is Calvin, was a product manager at Google, Microsoft, and DoorDash before trying to break in political work by becoming a session aide for State Senator John Lovick this year. He's been a member of Tech for Housing for 6 years. So welcome, Scott and Calvin. We'll hear from you.
While Scott gets the computer set up, thank you, Laura, for the wonderful introduction. Again, I'm Calvin. Thank you, Michael, for the wonderful... Is it possible to... Oh, I'll just... Okay. Thank you, Michael, for the wonderful presentation. I do want to emphasize Michael is a professional in the space, and Scott and I are advocates. So Michael's a lot smarter than we are, but we get to be more political because our boss isn't the mayor. I think the theme of what you'll hear from us tonight is that we want Michael to do more, and dream bigger, and Michael is working in a much more constrained world than we are. But part of enabling the city to dream big is providing feedback on this plan. So Scott and I are going to talk about what we think about the plan. And our key takeaway is the same as Michael. We'd love for y'all to give the city feedback because we think it'll make for a better plan.
Yeah. All right. We're going here. Yeah. And I think you'll find that we agree with Michael and the city on both a lot of the problems that we're currently facing and what the solutions to those problems are. We just want to solve things, faster. Why wait? As he mentioned, this is part of a 20-year plan. This is part of this history of comprehensive planning and growth management in the state of Washington. And so I like to make sure that we're framing this in terms of thinking about our legacy, thinking about the benefits that we all currently enjoy because of plans that have been put in place long before we arrived in this city, one way or another. I think our Olmsted parks are just, the epitome of that, of these Arboretum and Seward Park, these beautiful spaces that we get to enjoy today because someone had the foresight 100 years ago to set them aside. And so just thinking about other things, housing first among them, but other benefits that we hope to leave to our descendants, our future selves, whoever it may be. But thinking in 20 years, are they going to, praise us or are they going to curse us for our short-sightedness?
I love the word legacy that Scott uses because we're just past the 100-year anniversary of the adoption of single-family zoning in Seattle. It was 1923, where we declared that 70% of Seattle's residential land would be zoned for single-family homes only, making housing construction largely illegal in large swaths of the city. And for me, when I look around the city, I see the legacy of high rents, homelessness, and car dependency within that planning decision from 1923. And the question becomes, what do we want our legacy to be over the coming decades?
And so you might be thinking, we're talking a lot about growth tonight. And so setting some context here about how do cities grow, why do cities grow? Cities grow primarily, maybe, or you can think of it helpfully on two dimensions. They grow in the number of jobs that attract people to those cities, and they grow in the number of housing units that house those workers that come to the city. On your left-hand side here, we can think about scenarios where there's no job growth. If you provide housing, then you might become a wonderful retirement community, as you sometimes see in Arizona and Florida and things. That's not really the situation that Seattle faces. We also are lucky enough to avoid some of the kind of urban doom loop that unfortunately afflicts areas in the Rust Belt where they have neither job growth nor housing growth, and that presents its own set of problems. So what we're faced with is, for better or worse, we have had very robust job growth, particularly for tech workers like us. So we're part of the problem, also maybe try to be part of the solution. And so we're confronted with this choice. Do we provide the housing for the people that are coming here to fill those jobs and become a prosperous boom town economy? Or do we follow the path that we've, sadly seen in places like San Francisco, where they fight housing and don't accommodate the growth that they're seeing on their economy, and become a city of stark inequality, where if you're fortunate enough to have housing and afford housing, you can have access to those great jobs and, that nice city, but then you develop this growing population that is priced out to the other states or out onto the streets.
When I think about the sorts of choices we've made on these axes for the past 20 years, I think we've made a lot of decisions to boost job growth and haven't made as many bold political decisions. To boost job growth, but we haven't been boosting housing growth. The Seattle Times editorial board is my number one boogeyman in this area. Well, they will come out and oppose efforts to tax wealthy individuals like they did with the head tax, 5 or so years ago. but therefore sort of keeping a low tax environment that fuels job growth, but then they'll come out in opposition to modest accessory dwelling unit reforms while depressing housing. So we've done a lot of things to stoke job growth while depressing housing growth. And for me, that's a big reason why housing has become so unaffordable.
And then just in case you're wondering, okay, let's say we build all this great housing. Maybe that just leads to more jobs and more people coming here. Will it actually make our city affordable? Well, we have a live experiment running right now in Austin, Texas. They're building housing like gangbusters, and they've recently seen that that really does both allow more people to enjoy that city, but also drives down their rents and makes the city actually more affordable. So we would like to frame the choices that are being made in this growth plan in terms of, what are the benefits to housing? What kind of problems does housing solve for us? And what choices are being made and could be made to maybe solve those problems in a different way? And so one of the big things is aging in place. My grandmother lived here in Seattle in Lake City, and she aged in place in a single family home that she had lived in for many decades, and my father grew up in. And that's great, but as you get older, you have mobility concerns. You can potentially start to become socially isolated if you can't leave your house very often. And also just, your housing might be less affordable if you're no longer working, and maybe you don't need all of the space that you once needed. And so we'd like to see, more on the middle housing that can provide the right amount of space for everyone at whatever phase of their life that they're in at a price that makes sense for them in that phase. More focus on building condos and other types of units that are horizontally laid out that would have an elevator to access the unit so that you're not climbing upstairs. A lot of the houses that we see both being built right now and being proposed would be townhouses that are, great for certain families, but have very steep stairs, a lot of floors of stairs that doesn't make sense for everyone. And then we'd also like to see more kind of even bolder thinking, more expansive thinking of communal living options. Like we happen to be, present in right now, that there are a select few types of communal living that we currently allow, but there could be a whole spectrum of different types that people could experiment with and opt into if they, want to have closer neighbors, if they want to share a kitchen with some of their neighbors, etc.
I just want to emphasize how amazing this space is and this building is. Look at there's maybe 100 of you in the audience on a Tuesday night, and there's amazingly beautiful art out in the hallways, and the space is wonderful. But it's very hard to build something like this in large swaths of the city. We're on First Hill, which is zoned for very tall buildings, but I would hazard, 80 or 90% of the city, this type of amazing space is effectively illegal to build in. So when we think of dreaming big, frankly, I think of this space we're in as a space of dreams, and I'd like other people to have the amazing opportunity that y'all have.
So another aspect of housing, or a perspective that we can bring to this, is thinking about housing in terms of keeping your grandchildren nearby. So if I could have a little bit of audience participation, could I see a show of hands for anyone who has grandchildren? All right, pretty good. And then I would like you to keep your hands raised if your grandchildren are within half an hour from where we are right now. Oh, all right, that's better than I thought, So I am fortunate enough to live pretty close to where my parents live and where I grew up. I have several family friends that have been blessed with children, multiple children, and they've been completely priced out of Seattle and have had to move to Arizona because that's where they could find a job and that's where they could afford a house. And so their parents, if they want to see their grandkids, have to get on a flight instead of a bus ride or a short car drive. And so these are the stakes, I guess, to these kind of decisions is, can people stay in the neighborhood where they grew up? Can families, stay together? And another potential objection, we'll see in the Q&A what people might think, but sometimes people are concerned about that new housing will be luxury housing, only for the rich, only for, tech workers like us. But one of the trade-offs is if you don't build that luxury housing, then all of our single-family houses with yards becomes the luxury housing. I don't know if any of you are fans of Zillow or these other apps, you can go look. But if you want a single family house with a yard in Seattle, it's gonna cost you probably at least $1 million. So if that's not luxury housing, I don't know what it is. And then one last thing is that we are both proponents of social housing, that we just created the Seattle Social Housing Developer a year ago. Haven't started building any units there yet, but we're hoping to get that going. So a lot of our apartments and things that currently get built by market rate developers are often small studios, maybe a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom, something. If we kind of empower the social housing developer and loosen some of those restrictions, that group can decide that it is important for our city that we have 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom apartments that are both affordable and of a size that is adequate for a family that wants to stay in the city. Okay, and then hopefully this is something many of you are aware of, but also housing is one of our best climate solutions. We are on that map right there in the deepest blue area, and this is not talking about political affiliation, this is talking about our carbon footprint. So people that live in nice, dense, walkable neighborhoods like this, where you can get around on transit, you can walk to the grocery store, have some of the lowest environmental impact of anyone in America. And we should encourage that. We should build more neighborhoods where that's possible and you have lower impact. And we're also starting to see things like wildfires that are on the edges of our cities, creating smoke and destroying houses and things. And we should try to avoid that, put the housing where it belongs in the city instead of out on the sprawling on the edge. And so, because of all these problems, all these concerns, we are inspired to request some Space Needle thinking. I don't know if anyone's heard this phrase before, but our very own mayor has called to us to think boldly, to think about the solutions for our future and what we could be doing to make our city vibrant. And thinking back to, again, one of these legacy things, the Space Needle that, probably didn't go through a whole lot of community review sessions like this one, but I bet most people in this room are happy that we built it. And it was maybe a bit of a crazy idea, but it solved the problem they had, and it has become part of our, what makes Seattle so unique and so lovable. So, like I said, we probably don't disagree too much on the problems our city is facing or the solutions that we need to address our housing crisis. One of the things we might disagree on is just the scale and speed at which we address those problems. So on this chart, you see the blue line on the left is how many units of housing that Seattle has been building over the last several years. And we've been building that. That's a time where we've seen increasing rates of homelessness, where we've seen housing affordability, get harder and harder to achieve for most families. And then the orange line on the right there is the target number of housing units that the city is proposing that we build in this upcoming plan. And so I can't tell you exactly if that is going to help make our problems better or worse, but it doesn't look great to me.
I think this chart is the most important chart you'll see tonight. The current plan, while the individual changes we think are all amazing, in aggregate plans for only 100,000 units of housing built in Seattle over the next 20 years. By comparison, Bellevue is planning capacity for 150,000. So Bellevue has taken over Space Needle thinking. Publicola reported, I believe, that our population is expected to grow by 250,000 people over the next 20 years. And with an average of, I think it's like 2.05 people per household, the takeaway is we are not building enough housing for the number of people that will plan to move here. Therefore, we are planning for displacement. When people move here and we don't build housing for them, someone else has to leave. And so by not thinking boldly enough in aggregate, while having the population growth we're kind of seeing, we expect rents to go up, and we expect people will have to leave the city because they can no longer afford to live here.
And then to get maybe focus back on kind of the micro level again. So we applaud the changes to the neighborhood residential, to our thinking about these middle housing, providing more flexibility in terms of the size and shape of the houses that we can build. But maybe put on your distance vision glasses here and squint a little bit and see which of these pictures is the old, less growth, and which is the new, more growth and adapting to our future. And I think you might find that they're pretty hard to tell apart. Basically, currently you can build 3 units of housing on any neighborhood lot in Seattle. And in the future, you'll be able to build 4, but basically just the same square footage of housing, which is not likely to make a change very quickly.
So this will be the kind of housing that will be legalized in 70% of Seattle's residential land. These are the neighborhood residential zones. And the proposed changes are what's required under state law. Last year, House Bill 1110 said that cities over, I believe, 75,000 in population had to do this. And so we're not really being big thinkers here. We're, in some sense, doing the bare minimum as required under state law. And some could argue we're even doing less than that because of restrictive rules around Florida area ratio and lot coverage. I won't get into details too badly, but we are really constraining the 4 units that can be built on those single lots. And when so much of our city's land area will be zoned like this, it does have large impacts on the kinds of housing that we build in these areas, as well as areas are some of the most high opportunity areas that we have in the city. These are our Laurelhurst. These are our North Capitol Hills. These are our North Ballards. This is where a lot of money is. And we know that children raised in these zip codes go on to be more successful than children raised in zip codes that have less opportunity. So in these areas that have incredibly high opportunity, we're doing the bare minimum when I would like us to be doing more so that more people can experience the opportunity that these neighborhoods provide.
All right, and here's another beautiful map of the city of Seattle. Yeah, it's probably too small to really make out any details, but the thing I want you to see on this is just look all the way on the right there, and you see the whole city, about half the city covered in those orange and blue. Those are all the places that the city has started to study that we could add more housing. And is currently proposing that we don't add more housing, that we stick with the status quo. So one of the examples he was talking about, that we can build more apartments along arterials that have transit access. That's great. I currently live on an arterial, and I wouldn't recommend it. Cars are very loud. People would love to live a block or 2 away from an arterial so they can still have a nice, easy walk to their bus stop, but don't have to live on the loud, polluted streets that have a lot of through traffic. So these are the kind of things that we could be doing that would provide more housing, would provide better housing, arguably, make the city a little bit more livable and affordable.
one specific change that was proposed in quote unquote alternative 5, but did not make it into the draft plan, was that the alternative 5 had 36 neighborhood centers, while only 24 of them made it into the draft plan. And these neighborhood centers would allow apartment buildings up to 6 stories. And so that's a significant amount of housing that was cut from alternative 5 in the draft plan. I would also argue that these neighborhood centers, you saw the graphic of the 800-foot walk shed that the denser housing would be allowed. I would love to see these neighborhood centers expand much further. An 800-foot walk shed is not a walk shed you frequently hear in
It's like
urban
one
planning.
block.
It's one block, yeah. So it's not really much of a center, in my opinion. So I think one of the big differences that I saw in Alternative 5 that I don't see in the draft plan is that we have too few neighborhood centers, and the neighborhood centers that we do have are too small.
So we are happy to talk Q&A, do some more hot takes, give you fill in any more detail of things that we haven't gotten into yet. But our takeaway is the same one that Michael gave you, is we want to encourage you to use your voice. Tell the city, what your vision is for how we can make Seattle even better, even more affordable, more livable than it is right now. So we are part of the Complete Communities Coalition, which is a group of everyone that cares about housing in Seattle and wants there to be more of it and more affordable housing, including FutureWise, including the Habitat for Humanity, including the Chamber of Commerce, which cares a lot about making sure that we have growth for our businesses. So it is a very broad group of people that don't necessarily agree on every single issue, but do all agree that housing is really the crux of a lot of our problems and could be a big part of our solutions. We would love for you to engage with the One Seattle plan through the city's engagement mechanisms.
If I could give one suggested comment, if you're going to remember one thing from my talk tonight, it's that planning for 100,000 units of housing over the next 20 years is not enough. That's the single most important number in the plan, in my opinion. And if you were going to leave one comment, and you were asking me what to say, I would say, ask the city to get that number higher. We should need to plan for more housing than 100,000.
We could be bigger than San Francisco, and as a Seahawks fan, I think that is a point of pride, and we should be gunning for them. All right, we're good.
Let's see. Thank you very much, Scott and Calvin. The 3 speakers are going to be seated up here at the front table, and we have mic runners. Adele's going to be over here. Oh, Susan is here too. Jenny's got your mic, Susan, and then Bill is over there. So what I'd like to do is rotate between the 3 different sections. And remember, you're asking questions. Okay, thank you. So, any questions? Let's see. All right, well, I see one right over there. Who's over? Okay.
Go ahead. Yes. Yeah, I'm just wondering about things. One of the things one of you said was that under this new plan, anybody could build a 3-plex or a 4-plex on their lot. So what I'm wondering, because my experience in the city is mostly in Washington Park or Madison Park. I had a small lot on Madison Park with a single-family home, and then a much bigger lot up on Washington Park. Are you saying that if I own those today, which I don't, I could build a 3 or 4-plex on them, and the city could not stop me from doing it?
I think I can take that on.
I hope that's the answer.
Yeah,
is yes.
Essentially, yes. I'm always very careful when people call me at work. I always want to ask, what's your address and what's the zoning there now? So I'm just going to assume that those are what we now call neighborhood residential zoning, used to be called single-family zoning. If that's the case, then the answer is yes, 4 units on a lot at a minimum. Yep.
Okay, there's a question over here. Anyone in the center section? Okay. Oh, hey, George, and then Karen. Or is that, who is that?
From a practical standpoint, what is the definition of affordable?
That's a really good question. In that there are many that I'll offer the kind of standard definition, but I want to talk about affordability a little bit. So there is, the under housing, Department of Housing and Urban Development, there are definitions based on a standard of a household spending more than 30% of its income, if a household needs to for its housing costs, that is considered unaffordable. Of course, that differs depending on your income. So what's important to the city as well, federal, state, city, is the lowest income households. So we look at what's our area average or median, and then below there, especially households that are earning less than about 60% of area median income, or even below 30% of area median income. It depends on the household size, what that number is exactly. But these are working households. These are people with jobs, cannot find anything that's affordable at that 30% of your income standard. And that's a challenge that the city is working hard on, like things like the housing levy that passed last year, nearly $1 billion for new below market rate units to meet that affordability. I just want to say broadly about affordable housing. Of course, there are households that earn more than 30% or even 60% of area median that are, maybe they're software engineers, maybe they're urban planners, and they also cannot afford the housing that they need in the city for a family. That's where this plan, in providing more choices in the marketplace, private, not subsidized housing, can help with affordability broadly. It doesn't provide housing that's affordable to lower income households, though. I don't know if that answers your question, but I just wanted to hum a few bars on that. So,
Hi, my question,
yeah, go ahead.
over here.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah,
I think that this plan deals with, importantly, a lot of zoning and a lot of market rate housing. But affordable housing, especially to working people and low-income people, will require some kind of subsidy, and that involves some kind of taxation. Scott and I are also very proud to advocate for increases in progressive taxation in our state. I think I can speak for Scott. We'd love to see an income tax. We'd love to see a wealth tax. We'd love to see progressive property taxes become more progressive. This plan is not concerned with taxation as its primary focus, but we as advocates like to advocate for big dreams in this plan, as well as big dreams in progressive taxation that would go on to subsidize housing to make it affordable for working people.
could you comment on the interaction between the plan as a document and zoning, which implements what happens? In other words, the city talks about 100,000 being a floor. It doesn't have to be a ceiling. It could be a lot more. How does that work? Do you have to change the comprehensive plan to allow that to happen, or is it just a question of zoning year by year by year?
Right, and so there are two really important questions you just asked, and one of them I was dying to answer a little bit. I want to talk about the 100,000 a little bit and put that in context, and then I'll talk about the zoning piece briefly. So I mean, I want to start by just quickly saying I honor and respect a really important conversation the city's having about how much we, they think there are different ideas about how much we need to do to rise to the challenge of our housing crisis. How much we need to upzone different areas, how much is enough housing. The 100,000 number is not the total amount of housing that would be allowed under zoning under this plan. That actual number is much higher. Even if we don't amend the plan right now, we can accommodate 150, 160,000 units of housing. With the changes that I talked about, We know that we're going to be increasing zoning in a lot of neighborhoods to create more opportunity for builders to build housing, apartments, middle housing, on down the line. Probably over 200,000 units of potential housing. So that's a lot of housing. It's a very legitimate debate about whether that's enough, and I honor my, the panelists here to talk about that. But it's a little bit of an apples to oranges to look at that graph that has the 100,000 on one side and recent housing production on the other. Not the least of which is we built all that housing under existing zoning. I mean, the city has done a lot to provide opportunities for housing. Welcome a conversation about whether it's enough. Your question on the zoning, yeah, that gets a lot. That's a lot of this is an urban, this can get really muddy when we're talking to people about the plan because it's not the zoning code. It is more of think of it as a general map that guides the zoning that we will enact through a separate law. So it's a little higher level, like neighborhood center. It'll just indicate, here's a neighborhood center, it's in this area, the zoning there'll be probably several different zones applied to different parcels or blocks within a neighborhood center, and they'll define the rules about how tall the building could be, what kind of setback from the street, how many units would be allowed. That's a more detailed way to implement the plan that then when people want to file for a building permit, we can tell them what they can or cannot build. So higher level in the plan guides the zoning. Zoning is the next step. And we'll be doing those two things during this next year. Over here, Laura. Laura, over here.
Could I just add one more comment on that?
Here.
So, so yeah, definitely zoning is one of the key drivers of how much growth and how many housing units we can see added. But fundamentally, it is a question of economics, both the kind of job prospects and economic prosperity of the region, but as well as the economics at that individual parcel, like lot level, that, zoning, which primarily is defining, how many units, how tall, but, all these different factors of the setbacks and how much parking you might be required to provide. Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into it. And so just the main, thing that we would like to see the city is planning for abundance and really removing the barriers that even, it's one thing to write on a piece of paper, you're allowed to build housing here. It's another thing to see that housing actually get produced. And so just having that drive and ambition to really move it off of the paper and into housing that people get to enjoy.
Hey, Bill has somebody? No.
I've got it.
Hello? Hello? I haven't heard anything so far about planning for fire stations, ambulance, the condition of the roads in the neighborhoods, where there are countless useless roundabouts. I haven't heard, how are you working with the small bus connections with the new lines being put in? All this will happen at the same time. Where are the priorities? And you talked about community center, you talked about a village store. These other things are just as important.
Thank you for that. I totally agree, and I knew it flew by probably pretty fast in my presentation. I had one slide on the whole rest of the plan. We have a capital facilities element which talks about fire stations. It talks about many of the other facilities and services we need. We have a transportation element as well as a brand new Seattle transportation plan that the Seattle Department of Transportation just released. It has helped to shape the transportation levy that was just announced this last week to improve our roads and the condition of our roads. It's a big emphasis there. So I apologize, and given that tonight we're focusing on housing and growth, there's a lot more in the plan that supports a lot of the priorities that you just talked about. We just really didn't have time for.
Bill, there's a question behind you over there, but I think, how about, who's next? Okay.
Is it my
Go
turn?
ahead. Wait, hold on a minute. We'll get back to you, okay? Got someone here.
For many, if not most, single-family home owners, their equity in their home is a major part of their retirement planning. So as housing becomes more affordable for new homeowners, how does that affect the current aging out homeowner?
Yeah. I'm happy to address this. So the beauty is there's actually not as much of a trade-off as you might first expect at first glance. A lot of the value of your current single-family house is the value of the land. So the structure, the day you buy it, that structure starts to depreciate unless you're doing real good, keeping up with your maintenance. But the price of that land that is under it has probably been doubling every 10 years or something like that. And so if we allow people to utilize that same amount of land to build 6 units or 12 units or something like that, that cost of that land can be spread across more families. And so the current resident that might sell that and get redeveloped, they still get a very hefty windfall, and they can use that for whatever their future plans are. But the housing that replaces it also becomes more affordable because those future residents are sharing the cost of that land across multiple units. So it is possible. It's all these things are very complicated on exactly how it shapes out, but it is possible.
She's not done yet.
Thank you. What if the
It's good.
What if the single-family homeowner wants to age in place? What is happening to his taxes? And I know you're big into progressive, and I won't live to see it, I'm sure. But what about the folks who are going to be taxed out of their home in which they want to age?
Property taxes can be a very sticky, a very challenging problem to address because we have a provision in the state constitution that says that property must be taxed uniformly. There are policy proposals that I absolutely love that would essentially ignore $50,000 of a home's value or $100,000 of a home's value when calculating the property tax. So people with big mansions would pay a higher percentage of their property in property taxes, while more modest dwellings would pay less. Unfortunately, our state constitution makes that unconstitutional, and thus property taxes a quite regressive tax in our state. So I agree with you that it's a problem. In order to address it, we have to go very deep with a constitutional amendment.
This microphone is challenging. It's something the city is certainly aware of, and something, we're one of the other agencies that of course, the city is not the primary taxing agency, but rather the county, and we have conversations occasionally with the county assessor and are thinking about, are there new tools to help provide some property tax relief, especially for households that may want to age or stay in place, when we know that even under the new state law, which requires the middle housing zoning, there is going to be change over time in single-family neighborhoods, and that will have some impact on property taxes. We don't know how much that impact will actually be, though, so it's something we're just going to have to monitor as well. It may not be as much as people fear. is what
I need to go over to this
In-
side of it. Huh? Well, now we have people over here, so let's.
I found this very fascinating, and what we're really talking about is a transformation from NIMBYism to YIMBYism. And this seems to me be involving a very complex sociological changes in people's attitudes, and we try to think in different ways about how it goes. How are we approaching that, and to what degree is NIMBYism going to get in the way, but in the form of challenges and everything else to get to the YIMBYism that you're wanting?
Yeah, well, we're spreading the good word right here, so we're part of the change right now. So, I mean, one thing that I think a lot of people don't actually mind having more neighbors. I bet you all enjoy having your friends nearby and having people to socialize with. Businesses love to have more neighbors because those are their customers, and that allows people to have access to a bigger variety of services and things. Really, the thing that people don't like having near them are cars. Cars are big, cars are loud, cars are dirty. So we have to find a way to grow that is less reliant on cars. If you add, 6 neighbors, 12 neighbors, and every one of them brings a car to your street, you bet you're not going to be happy about that. So we need to find ways that people can live in places and be less reliant on that and use our public transportation system.
I'll also say, I think the brand YIMBY started in the San Francisco Bay Area with kind of a libertarian kind of tech angle to it. Like, we just need to let the market rip, and then housing will become affordable. And I think that started poisoned the YIMBY brand, and maybe still to this day. I still don't like telling people I'm a YIMBY because it can't address questions like George's when we talk about sort of really affordable housing. YIMBYism without subsidy doesn't really have an answer to that. So I think the YIMBY brand, let's call it, has been moving to the left on taxation policy, and I think that has been a politically winning dynamic in the Seattle area that I haven't always seen in the San Francisco Bay Area. You're more common to see people who are left NIMBY in the Bay Area, and that's pretty uncommon around here.
I just want to say very briefly, I've been going out into community, we have had open houses in different neighborhoods. We're going to have more conversations. We did outreach earlier in this process to shape the plan that I talked about tonight. It's been really remarkable. My perspective is how there's a much, I think, richer and more open conversation about facing our housing challenges. That is, I'm encouraged to hear that from people in Seattle. I think the very scenario that Scott was describing about the price of new housing, I'm seeing it on my own block, and my neighbors are seeing that a lot of people are getting priced out of the city. Their kids are getting priced out, and they're open to new solutions. I think what they want to hear from us are some creative thinking around some of the things they love about Seattle being retained and enhanced, like trees, like access to open space, and can we grow and do those things and also do the other?
Can everybody that's got a question raise your hand so I can get an idea of how many more questions we have? We've got 2, 3 over here, 4, 5, 6. Okay, well let's take the one back here and then we'll come back. Oh, Henry.
What I'm
okay.
really interested in is vitality in cities, and what can you put into the plan that really brings vitality to the neighborhood or urban centers that you are proposing. I mean, can imagine myself living in being willing to live in an apartment with less space if I was in walking distance of cafes and theaters and all kinds of places of activity. It's hard to legislate that kind of thing, but I think you have ways of encouraging it.
I mean, to begin with, zoning itself can help to shape what activities are in a neighborhood, whether we have commercial zoning and what kind of commercial zoning, whether we're investing in public amenities like pocket parks, small parks, and whether we require some provision in our development standards for plazas and more active places for people to interact. There's a lot there. I will just say this new idea of a neighborhood center is just an example of where we're trying to find some synergy here between allowing more housing and more types of housing in neighborhoods which have a lot of that good stuff, the vitality, and that there's a mutually reinforcing thing there. You have more people, more customers, more people on the street and interacting with each other can help support some of our smaller neighborhood business districts, and then they become richer clusters of that stuff that provides a neighborhood vitality and attracts more people, makes it a more livable place for the people who are living in those apartments and townhomes. So that's what we're trying to do with some of these new concepts.
I'd like to suggest that sometimes we can do more by doing less. Some of our most vibrant, most desirable, most beloved neighborhoods are places that we built before we had zoning, before we had centralized planning that's trying to exactly craft how a neighborhood should look and feel. Think some of the older parts of Capitol Hill, think about downtown Ballard. These places that used to have a corner store, and you could just build that. You didn't need the city to introduce a new policy to allow us to build corner stores. People just built what was needed, what was desired in that area, and you would get these beautiful, diverse mixtures of residents and businesses and things. So yes, there's a role for, especially transportation, parks, and open space. There is a role for, kind of the top-down planning for these things. But there is also a role for just stepping back and letting people do what they want and build the things that, the people in that neighborhood would want to utilize.
Okay, I think we're down to about the last 5 minutes, so how will I go? How about we go here and then back? Can I hear from May and then Bob? Oh my, okay, well let's go with, you're all set, May? You don't, oh, okay. Nancy never got to ask her question.
I haven't.
Oh, here's
Okay.
Jean.
Shut up. I appreciate the fact that this is about housing, but you can't extricate just housing from the other aspects of life. And I appreciate Henry's question. But I think of ages ago when my children were small and they were running around through the backyards of all the other single-family houses in Madrona when I was able to buy a house for $13,000. But the fact that we need ways in which there can be lots of interaction for kids, as well as for those of us who have a little bit less mobility now, need to run while we're doing things. But we need soccer fields and basketball hoops on street corners. But the mix of trees, we are so blessed by having Freeway Park right next to us. And the mix of informal as well as formal ways to park, I think, is absolutely crucial for the whole picture of how do you decrease the number of single-family neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you. Now, where are we? Who's still left here that wants to say something? May, I called on once before. Okay.
So I really applaud your effort. I'm all for it, and I think it's wonderful. We definitely need more housing. We need more low-income housing. There's no doubt in my mind that you're going in the right direction. My only concern is that I didn't hear you address the impact on schools. The schools are having a rough time. If we are successful in bringing in more people with lower income, and who hopefully have children, what will this do to our school system, which is really struggling now? I wish you could tie those two together.
I'll just quickly say our schools, the school system goes through cycles of how they're planning for enrollment and what actual enrollment is. Right now, the school system is facing problems in not having enough kids going to the Seattle Public Schools. I know we work with SPS, and they are very interested in us effectively planning for housing that is suitable for families, and that can and then will choose to go to Seattle Public Schools. So we're trying to work together with them in that way. It's not seen, certainly our relationship is not one as like controlling the impact on schools, but rather what is the benefit, the planning for the housing we need could be for the school system. That's the way that we work with the SPS.
Increasing the supply is beneficial for and helps with the value of the units. However, right now in View Ridge, there is one house. It was torn down. They are building 6 units. The front unit is selling for $2 million. So your 6-unit house in one single-family home is not affordable. So density and affordability are not necessarily completely related to. Okay, it has to do with more things. Also, zoning has to be consistent. It's a law. It needs to be. You cannot just say here you have a 6-story condominium and here you have a single-family house. Thank you.
I think we've all seen, I've seen it on my own block, exactly the housing that's going in, that's quite expensive. We take what we're trying to do with the comprehensive plan is take a long view and a large view. So certainly looking at individual projects that are not in homes that are not very affordable. It's all a matter of the long game that I think the city is trying to plan for, which is how can we provide for housing abundance over time that starts to make some of that housing at least not go up, and hopefully in some cases go down. There will always be expensive housing in the city, and especially even in the middle housing. But a single-family detached home on my block is $2.5 million or so I've seen over the last several years. But some of the accessory dwelling units, some of the 3-unit projects you see going in also in my neighborhood, some are in that $700,000 to $900,000. I know that's not affordable to a lot of households, but it does meet the need for some of our families and some of the households that would like to stay in the city. And that's why we're also looking at things like the neighborhood centers to provide more small apartments, more condominium options, and really trying to fill in the gap. Right now, the gap between a standalone single-family home for $3 million and a studio apartment for $2,000 a month, there's a huge gap in there, and that we're trying to fill it. And I think we do have similar goals here. It's just a matter of degrees and where and what kind of actions.
Yeah, and I would encourage everyone, if you think it's not affordable now, look at San Francisco. It can always be worse. The house that you're shocked is $1 million or $2 million in Seattle. It's probably $3 or $4 or $5 million in San Francisco. You would never believe, some of these rundown tiny houses that go for astronomical sums. And yeah, this is a problem we've been kind of digging ourselves into for multiple decades. It's going to probably take multiple decades to hopefully dig ourselves out of it a little bit. But yeah, building more supply is definitely part of the solution. There are the 3 S's of housing, is a helpful way to remember it. We need supply, we need subsidy, and we need stability. So that subsidy point is critical. There's just certain population that the market is never going to provide housing at a cost that they can afford. So in addition to a supply of market rate housing, we are also always going to need subsidized housing for those who can't afford the market.
Yeah, well, we really need to wind up. And is there one more question that's just burning here? Well, I see 2. Okay, Bob, and then Lorraine, and then we should quit and let our guests go home.
One issue that I haven't seen discussed, I agree with the progressive goals that all you 3 are approaching in slightly different ways. But one item that I haven't seen covered that I'd like to see some progress on is in the architecture, urban design plan of this new, we've seen for the last 20, 30 years, a lot of the upzoning of single-family lots here and there in Ballard, and some of them are, frankly, less attractive than the rest of the single-family neighborhood because of the zoning that they're working with. There's often one structure in the back, and then they're facing the parking lot in the back of some other. Anyway, it's rather minimal, unpleasant. Anyway, I guess my question is, what kind of work and incentives as this zoning gets increased all around? I see an opportunity if there were incentives to not so much to increase every single family lot up to 3 or 4 units, but to aggregate those and have an opportunity to make an attractive campus or complex. You've mentioned like courtyards or an enclosed green space. There's lots of examples, as you mentioned, in the century-old garden apartments and so forth on Capitol Hill and maybe other places.
That's a great question. We'll come back for a whole other session to talk about urban design. I know, but I'll quickly say one of the important constituencies that we're professional groups that we're working with is the American Institute of Architects. They recently
and I'm sympathetic and part of that world,
Awesome.
And I see that as equally important to the spread of the increased zoning. I see it as a crucial threshold in terms of the quality of city that we develop just by the increase of density.
And it's very difficult to legislate design. It's a challenge that I think planners have
excuse me,
faced.
I'm going to interrupt you because what I'm saying is there is an opportunity in the way that the zoning is applied. I'm sure there's a way of working it out so that there is an incentive to aggregate lots. There may be some legislation or even the state legislature that's required, but I think it's time.
That's a very productive idea. No, I really like the idea of thinking beyond just.
It's more than I think. A lot of us know what good housing complexes look like, but it's
that's great idea. I don't know if you want to add anything, but yeah.
I'll just add, architects don't want to build ugly buildings. Developers don't want to sell ugly buildings. If you see an ugly building, it's probably because they were constrained to do that. So if we allow more flexibility, we are likely to get better looking buildings.
Wow. Well, do you still want to ask another question, or we're really running out of time?
At this point, it's kind of scary. But yeah, I sort of do. I really appreciated the look back at history from.
You have to hold your mic up, Lorraine.
I really appreciated the look back at history that all three of you brought to this. That's what makes the present make sense, is how we got here, right? So if you understand the past, the present becomes much, much more eloquent. But I would also say this, coming from livable Kirkland, which is my roots before I came to Horizon House, this is a regional problem. This is a metro problem. And I know we're here tonight to talk about the Seattle plan, but when you chart jobs against living space, you are looking at a bigger soup bowl than simply Seattle. And, it's many, many years since Metro was created, but this is a Metro level set of problems to solve. And we are Seattle people here now, but this is a metropolitan area and it deserves that level of attention.
Yeah.
I think you're making an extremely deep point here that points to why housing has become so unaffordable across the United States. I think it's a very American tendency to have a very local democracy, and that has caused cities throughout the United States to plan at the very lowest level and not plan, as you are suggesting, at a higher sort of community metro area level. It's why I think that the state legislature is so important for tackling our housing challenges. I think House Bill 1110 was one of the most impactful pieces of legislation passed by the state in a very long time, and there are more bills at the state level that would do even more, like the state's transit-oriented development bill that would make places like Mercer Island accept more housing because they're getting a light rail station, which is billions of dollars of public infrastructure, but they're not necessarily welcoming more people to live near it. So I think your point is very correct, and if you see your state representative, I think you should make that point again to them.
Oh, wonderful. Well, there's so much to think about, and I just really thank our speakers for coming and providing all this information, and it starts us thinking. We have a few copies of this plan, And if people want to know how to comment, you tell us here, right? I mean, or I can, if you email me, I can send you.
All of the contact information is on this, and if you really liked what you saw tonight, you can have a poster in your, put it up on your wall. No, but seriously, hopefully this is an accessible way to refresh and think about what you heard about tonight. Please, please, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to everybody.